Hi everyone, welcome back to Learning with Leah. I'm so glad that you could join me again with another video on tenses. So as you might know, I have been doing a series on English grammar and talking about all of the tenses we use in English. So today we're going to dive in and talk about the first perfect tense that we have done so far. So we're going to talk about the present perfect tense. So let's get started. All right, so first of all, we need to talk a little bit about the present perfect tense and what does it do? What are we talking about? So with the present perfect tense, we are talking about an action. Typically, it's an action taking place once or many times before now. So many times we use this tense to talk about experiences or changes taking place. There are many other reasons, and I'll get to that in a second, but this is the main focus. Also, the present perfect tense is an interesting tense because it combines the past and the present. So when we are using this tense, many times we are talking about past experiences that somehow relate to now. So it's an interesting tense. So if we think about a timeline, and this is now, the present perfect tense has many different ways that we could write on the timeline. One way is if we are talking about experiences that happened once, twice, or even 3 times in the past. Okay? So we are talking about our experiences in the past. Okay? I'll explain in a minute a little bit more about that. It also could be about an experience that is continuing now. So maybe this experience is still happening now. Okay, so there's a few different ways that we can use the timeline for this. Let's get into specifically when. When do we use the present perfect tense? What are some examples? Okay, so number one, I think the biggest area in which we use the present perfect tense is to talk about unspecified time. So when we are talking about events or things that we have done, but we don't specify when it happens. For example, I have seen this movie before. Or maybe I have seen this movie 6 times. I love this movie. Right? We use the present perfect tense because we haven't specified when that happened. We haven't said it was last week. We didn't say it was last year, or we didn't say on August 13th, right? There's no time associated with it, right? The present perfect tense, most of the time, we do not specify a time with the present perfect tense. We're talking about the general idea of experiences, but not the specific time when that occurs, okay? So, for example, let's read this again. I have seen this movie before. This is an event that happened in the past, but we don't know exactly when, right? That's kind of why the circle is there. It's sometime in the past. But if we want to use a specific time, we need to use simple past. If we talk about something in the past, maybe we say, I have seen this movie yesterday. We would say, I saw the movie yesterday. Because we have specified the time when we saw it, then we're going to use the simple past. Okay? So if the time is specified in your sentence, you need to use simple past. If it is not specified, we use the present perfect. All right, let's go on to number 2. We also use the present perfect to talk about experiences. But important, there's no specified time. Again, we don't specify the time. For example, I have been to Europe 3 times. Right? That was an experience that it's not true for me. I wish that might be an experience somebody had, but we don't specify when that happened. If we said, if you wanted to specify the years that you went to Europe, you would have to use the simple past. You could say, I went to Europe in 2015, 2017, and 2019, for example. But you would have to use the simple past. For general experiences, but no specified time, we use the present perfect. So I have been to Europe 3 times. All right, number 3, for accomplishments. Things that you have accomplished, we can use present perfect tense. But again, the same rule for no specified time. If we talk about something that someone has done, for example, he has graduated from college. Okay, we can talk about our accomplishments that way. But if you add a year or a month, then and talk about the time frame, then we have to use simple past. So he has graduated from college. Or we could use simple past and say he graduated from college last year, for example. Number 4, changes over time. We can use the present perfect tense to talk about changes that have occurred over time. So one example that I think we use a lot when we are talking to people, especially to children, is, wow, you have grown since last year. You have really grown, right? If we can see a change in somebody. Or maybe if somebody lost weight, you could say, wow, she really has lost weight over in the last year or in the last 2 years, okay? So that is something that you can talk about if it's a change over time. So for a change over time in the timeline, that would be maybe continuing to now, or it could be something that happened maybe in a season of time. Okay, number 5, expected actions or unfinished actions. So anything that we are expecting to finish or to complete, then we can use the present perfect tense. For example, the rain hasn't stopped. We know that at some point the rain will stop. We know that sometime. So it is an expected action, or it's unfinished right now, but it later will be finished and complete. So the rain hasn't stopped. Okay. Or another example is, he hasn't arrived yet. Okay? If we are expecting someone to come and arrive, then we can use the present perfect tense. Okay? He hasn't arrived yet. All right. Number 6, things that just happened. We can also use the present perfect to talk about things that happened right before now. An event or an action that happened just right before. Okay? So think about things that happen like right here, right before now. Okay? For example, I have just finished dinner. He has just finished working. I have just finished shopping, for example. If we want to talk about an event that just finished, that just happened, then we can use the present perfect. What is important is that we have to have just. If we say, I have finished dinner, it doesn't make sense, okay? So if we are talking about an action that happened before and we don't use just, then you just use the simple past. But if you are talking about something and you want to emphasize that it happened just now, then we can use this, but we have to use just. And you might notice it is between have or has and ed verb. Okay, that's important to know. It has to go between the two. All right, and the last one, actions that have started and are still happening. Okay, this is very important. This is what I was talking about here, that are continued actions, something that started in the past and have continued to now. and may still continue. For example, I have worked for my company since 2017. The reason why I can use this and use present perfect for this sentence is because it is still happening now. I started and I have continued and I am still working there now. Maybe you have moved and maybe 3 years ago you moved. You could say, I have lived in Ohio for 3 years, right? It's the action started and it has continued. Okay, I have lived in the United States my whole life, right? That action started. I started living in the United States when I was born, and the action of living in the US is still occurring. So I can use the present perfect tense. I have lived in the US my entire life. Okay? All right, so these are the 7 most popular or most important ways that we use the present perfect tense and when to use them. All right, now let's do some practice and look at how to conjugate it in the affirmative, in the negative, and with questions. All right, now we are going to look at the affirmative. So affirmative means positive, right? Our affirmative sentences. First, we need to look at our rule. How do we form the present perfect tense? So we always start with our subject, of course. Then we're going to add has or have, depending on what person it is. Then we're going to add the past participle. Okay, so the past participle, you typically think of the ed ending for your verbs. Now, if it is a regular verb, such as work, right? The main verb is work, then you would just add ed. But if it is an irregular verb, then you will need to know the correct ending for the past participle. So it just depends on the verb you are using. You'll just have to make sure you know if it is regular or irregular. Okay? All right, so let's look now at our persons and how we conjugate them correctly. First person, I have worked, you have worked, he, she, or it has worked, we have worked, you have worked, they have worked. As you can see, our has and have is in the present tense, right? This is our normal present tense, while the past participle, while the main verb is in the past. And that's kind of why present perfect tense can be a little confusing and is a more difficult grammar and more difficult tense, because it's kind of combining, like I said before, combining your present and your past tense. So it kind of can be confusing. But just remember, your has and your have is in the present tense, while the past participle is your typical ed ending for the main verb. So we see here, the only one that changes is our third person singular, right? Typically it's the third person singular that changes, so you'll just have to remember to use has instead of have for this person. Let's look at some examples now. I have tried sushi. You have sang in the choir before. It has started snowing. We have gone fishing many times. They have written an essay for class. As you can see, we of course start with our subject. After our subject, we use have or has, depending on what person it is. So of course, it is third person singular, so we need has. Then we use our past participle, okay? So typically it's the ed ending if it's a regular verb, or it could be something different if it's not. So here we have tried, sang, started, gone, and written, okay? So this is, as you can see, many of our verbs in English are irregular. So it's something you will have to pay attention to. Sang and gone fishing and written are irregular verbs. All right, now let's look at the negative sentences. For the negative, the only thing that we need to add is not. As we have done in, I think, all of the tenses before, we're just going to add a negative. And as you know, it always goes between the helping verb, the first verb, and the last main verb. It always goes in between. That is the position. So it's very important that we put that there and not in the front or not in the back. It goes in the middle. Okay, so let's read the examples. I have not started school. You have not started school. He, she, or it has not started school. We have not started school. You have not started school. They have not started school. Okay, so as you can see, we still need to pay attention to our has or have verb, and we need to make sure we use on third person singular the has and not have. Then we're just going to add our negative. Again, you put it between has or have and your main verb. Okay, right here. Pretty simple. Let's look at some examples though first. All right, I haven't been to Europe. You haven't graduated yet. She hasn't gone to sleep. We haven't studied for the test. They haven't seen this TV show. All right, so as you can see, we always start with our subject. Then we add our helping verb, has or have, for the present perfect tense. Then we include our negative. Okay, so all of these you can see we have a negative here. Then we add our past participle. So some of these are regular, some are irregular, right? Been, graduated, gone, studied, and seen. As you might see, and as you might have noticed, is that here I use contractions, but I didn't put them here. So let's make sure that you know them. So we have has, not, and have not. Okay? Has not becomes hasn't. Hasn't. Okay? Have not becomes haven't. Haven't. Good. One more time. Hasn't. Haven't. Hasn't. Haven't. Okay? All right, I've said this before, but it's very important that you know contractions because it helps your English flow faster and more smoothly when you use contractions in your sentences. Okay, let's look at questions next. Next, we have questions. So you might have already picked up what the pattern is, but when we make a question, what we do is we switch the subject and our first verb, which is normally our helping verb, and we switch them in the positions. So instead of the subject being first in questions, we switch it so that has and have is now the first position. Then we have our subject, then we have our past participle. Let's look at the examples. Have I traveled? Have you traveled? Has he, she, he, or it traveled? Have we traveled? Have you traveled? And have they traveled? As you can see, we need to start with has or have, and of course, third person singular is going to be different. Then we add our subject, then we add our past participle. One small note that you might notice is that traveled only has one L. So in American English, which I am from America, we only add one L. In British English, though, they add two. So just so you know, it depends on who you are listening to when it comes to the word travel and using it in the past tense. Okay, let's look at the examples. Have I finished my homework? Have you been overseas? Has it stormed today? Have we prepared enough? Have they missed their flight? Okay, we start with has or have, we add our subject, then we add our past participle. Now, I think you are ready. I am going to have some practice questions in just a moment. The best part is questions. All right, it's question time. This is a great time for you to practice what you just learned and be able to produce this grammar tense. So here are 8 or 9 questions for you. In each of these questions, I included a subject and I also included a verb. What is in the parentheses is just extra information to complete the sentence. So you don't need to change anything. You just need to write it at the end of your sentence after the subject and the verb. Okay, so I want you to complete or make a sentence from these words. And then number 8 and 9, I want you to make your own examples. All right, make your own sentences. I'll show you how to do this really fast, and then I'll let you get working. Okay, so we have the example, Simon and the verb email, and then extra information is professor. So how do we make this a sentence? All right, so first, of course, we start with the subject. So the subject is Simon, or you can say he, right? It doesn't matter, that's up to you. So Simon or he. Then we have the verb email. Now, this is a he, which means it is third person singular, right? So third person singular would be has or have. If you said has, you are correct, right? Simon has, I don't need the plus anymore. Simon has, and then the past participle of email. This is a regular verb, so you're just going to add ed. Simon has emailed, and then professor, so we can say his professor. Simon has emailed his professor. We have the has and we have the past participle. Okay, so for the rest of these, I said if it is a question, and I added not if it needs to be a negative. Okay, all right, so I will get out of the way. If you want to pause the video or screenshot the video, go ahead and you can answer those questions. All right, make sure you comment those questions in a comment below. I will respond to you if there are any mistakes, and if you have any corrections, I will be sure to do that. All right, thank you so much for joining me today and learning all about the present continuous. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already so you can continue practicing with me in the future. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time.